what I like to do is actually go into the book 2 of Marcus Aurelius, where he describes the 5 ways that the soul degrades itself. So when it comes to the way of right action or integral action, we can begin to look at the 5 ways that the soul degrades itself that Marcus Aurelius described in his journal. And the first way is to see yourself as separate from nature. If we see ourselves as separate from nature, it can be something as simple as getting upset that it's raining outside, right? And you had some plans that you wanted to actually go and execute. But seeing yourself as separate from nature can go even deeper into that. It can go deeper into the idea of, as a human being, we are social animals. And as social animals, it is up to us in terms of our survival to cooperate with one another. And if we are acting against one another, we are going against our nature. If we are finding ourselves in the illusion of the egoic view, where we are viewing life through the lens of our ego, through the lens of our individuality, and seeing ourselves as separate from other humans, then we are starting to see ourselves separate from nature itself. And in doing so, this is one of the ways that the soul begins to degrade itself, according to Marcus Aurelius. Now, the second way that the soul degrades itself is when we think about doing something deliberately out of malice towards another person. So deliberately wanting to hurt somebody or inflict pain is the second way in which we degrade the soul. Now, the reason being is because, once again, we're violating that first one, which is to say that we are going against our nature as a human being. If humans are made for each other, if we're made to cooperate and move in a herd or move in a group in order to get things done and advance our species, then us going against ourselves, us killing each other, us stealing from each other, us getting upset and hateful with one another is going against that nature, and that ultimately degrades ourselves. When we attack other people, we are attacking ourselves simultaneously, because we are part of nature. We are not separate from it. And that is one of the ways that the soul degrades itself, because it goes against the very nature of our being and how we survive and thrive as a species. Humans are not the biggest, fastest, or strongest animals on the planet, but what sets us apart is our ability to cooperate with one another, our ability to come together and to think rationally and use our reasoning to create solutions to advance our species, to advance ourselves technologically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. And this is how we've been able to be the species that we are. Sure, we have our flaws, but the things that we've achieved as a species are incredible because of our ability to cooperate. So if we go against that, if we intend harm on another human being, what we're really and truly doing is going against ourselves. Now, the third, which is actually really similar to the 5 precepts, both the third of Marcus Aurelius' material as well as the 5 precepts are actually very similar, and you'll see that as we go through this. But the third way that the soul degrades itself is by being overpowered by pain or pleasure. So this is actually talking very similarly to where we were discussing expediency. And actually, this is what drew the inspiration for that particular delusion set. Now, being overpowered by pain or pleasure, what Marcus Aurelius discusses in Meditations is how being overpowered by pain sometimes is almost more understandable, right? Because we're in pain, we want to get out. It's something that brings our attention to the moment very quickly, very easily. Now, when we are overpowered by pain, what we're doing is we're not thinking in terms of what's important, we're not thinking in terms of meaning. So what that might lead to, if we're in pain, whether that's emotional or physical pain, what we might do is cease to use our rational faculty, cease to use our reasoning, and maybe go against our nature, maybe do something bad to someone else, or maybe not consider another person in the equation in our attempt to get away from the pain. And we might cause more harm, more collateral damage, just because we're trying to get out of it so bad, because we are thinking to ourselves that we have to, that we're demonizing these feelings of pain, and that we have to move away from them as quick as possible. Now, being overpowered by pleasure, Marcus Aurelius refers to as almost worse than being overpowered by pain, because in being overpowered by pleasure, what we end up doing is we're almost knowingly doing wrong. We're almost knowingly indulging in something that we know is maybe not good for us. And when we get overpowered by pleasure, this would lead to things like deception. This would lead to things like performance because we think that the pleasure of others' admiration is going to make us feel like enough, that's going to make us feel good. Or we might feel like, well, if I control the situation, if I get into a delusion of control and I make everything familiar and I make everything safe and I make it so that I am in control and I have sovereignty over everything, that might be, again, being overpowered by pleasure, which might cause us to manipulate somebody, might cause us to deceive somebody, to lie to them, to lie to ourselves. And so this is what would happen and how it degrades the soul when we become overpowered by either one of these, either pain or pleasure. Now, the fourth way that the soul degrades itself is by engaging in what we would call false speech, engaging in deception purposely. So again, this very similar and very related to the delusion of performance. When we are doing things knowingly deceiving, what we're doing is we're violating the very fabric of reality. Now, if you've been listening to these episodes, you know I draw a lot of inspiration from Jordan Peterson, and he has one of his rules in his first book, well, not his first book, but the 12 Rules for Life, where rule number 8 is tell the truth or at least don't tell lies. And the reason why he brings this up is because when we lie, what we're doing is we're attempting to bend the very fabric of reality in our favor. We're trying to do something, again, probably because we're being overpowered by pain or pleasure. So we're trying to manipulate the fabric of reality and how reality works. Now, the problem with this is the reason why it degrades the soul is because, just like we were discussing with the intentions and delusions, when we lie, when we deceive others, or we try to deceive ourselves, we always know. We always know at some level when we're trying to deceive or manipulate ourselves or other people. We feel it emotionally. Something feels off. There's an agitation, there's an irritation of some kind, and we feel off in doing so. So when we do this, we degrade ourselves because each time we lie, what we're expressing to ourselves is that we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust ourselves to be able to say the truth and to think that we're going to be okay for doing so. And what we are doing is basically reinforcing to ourselves that not only do we not trust ourselves, but that we need to trust others over ourselves. And we need to say the things that are going to make them like us or make them think a certain thing of us. And that is the reason why it becomes very difficult to accept ourselves and to have any sense of inner peace when we engage in deception. So this is why the soul degrades itself in this way, because it prevents us from being able to have any sense of inner peace, because there is an inability to accept ourselves when we engage in this particular behavior. Now, the fifth way that the soul degrades itself is to operate without aim or purpose. In other words, to drift through life aimlessly. What Marcus Aurelius suggests here is that when we are taking actions, it is very important that we have some form of aim or purpose, some form of intentionality, you might say, if we're talking about it through a Zen Stoic lens. Now, why this is important is because typically, when we don't have an aim or purpose, what we default to is a sense of expediency. We default to being overpowered by pain or pleasure. And we simply become a slave to our emotions when we're just simply drifting through life like that. So the counter to that is to have some form of aim, have some form of purpose in the actions and words that we speak. Now, the way that we can basically guide ourselves as to what the right aims or the right purposes are is to look at things through the lens of the intentions. If we are going to take an action, if we're going to say something, maybe we don't just say things because we feel like we have to say something, but instead we say things because that is what sincerely exists on our minds and in our hearts. Or let's say we're going to take an action. Let's say we're going to learn a particular skill set, or you're going to pick up a new sport. One example that I always like to use because I practice it myself is picking up a martial art. If you're going to pick up a martial art, are you doing it because maybe you want to perform or you want to look cool or be a badass? Or are you doing it because you know that it's going to be good for you, whether it comes to your health, weight loss, the ability to defend yourself, and moving into it with an aim or purpose of discipline, using that intention? When you're talking with another person, are you aiming to control that person, to make them think a specific thing? Or are you aiming to really understand them and how they might feel in a certain situation? So we can use the intentions as a way of guiding or helping us aim at things, especially in moments where we're not sure what the goal is. The point here is that it doesn't need to be a goal. It doesn't need to be oriented around an outcome. In fact, it's better if your intentions are not oriented around a specific outcome, especially when it comes with people, but instead oriented around bringing you back to your own humanity first and foremost. This is not to say that it's not a good thing to have goals, but if we have goals that are intended with delusions, what we're going to end up finding is that we create a lot of emotional friction along the way. We end up creating trouble for ourselves and drama for ourselves by engaging in intentions that are pointing us away from ourselves and our humanity. Right? These are going to create unnecessary and excessive suffering. So instead, using the four intentions and four delusions as a guide to see where you're aiming at will help with this particular part that would otherwise be what Marcus Aurelius would refer to as a way that this human soul degrades itself.